So I'm 23, I'm from the UK, I run a faceless YouTube channel called Wi-Fi Uni with 25,000 subscribers, and it makes me around 2 grand a month. And today I want to do something a bit different, which is think about what I'd tell myself at 21 if I could go back. Because I think that framing is more honest than general advice. Like, instead of telling you what you should do, I'm telling you what I wish I'd known. And I think that distinction matters because the things I wish I'd known are the things I had to learn the hard way. And the hard way is slower and more expensive in time and energy than it needs to be. Please excuse this AI slop voice. I promise the value in this video is worth it. And I want to be clear that 21-year-old me wasn't doing nothing. Like, I was curious about making money online. I was watching videos, I was thinking about ideas, and I had a vague sense that there was something there, but I hadn't started building anything real yet. And the gap between knowing something is possible and actually starting is where most people stay indefinitely. And I stayed there longer than I needed to. So the first thing I'd tell myself, and this is probably the most important one, is just start. And I know that sounds like the most generic piece of advice anyone could give. And I know 21-year-old me would have rolled his eyes at it. But hear me out, because I want to say something more specific than just start. What I mean is that the version of starting I kept putting off was the perfect version. Like, I kept waiting until I had the right idea fully formed, until I understood the niche completely, until I had the production workflow figured out, until I felt ready. And none of those conditions were ever going to be met before I actually started, because the clarity and the understanding and the workflow all come from doing it rather than from preparing to do it. The version of starting that I needed to do was the messy, imperfect version. Like, pick a direction that seems reasonable, make something, put it out, see what happens, and adjust. And the adjustment is where the learning is. And the learning is what produces the clarity. And the clarity is what makes the next thing better. And none of that loop starts until you actually start. I lost probably 6 months of compounding by not starting when I first thought I should. And at the scale the channel is at now, 6 months of compounding represents a meaningful number of subscribers and a meaningful amount of income. And that's the real cost of waiting to feel ready. The second thing I'd tell myself is to think about the money before you think about the content. And I know that sounds backwards, and I know it's not what most YouTube advice says, but I think it's right, and I want to explain why. Most advice about starting a YouTube channel starts with passion. Like, find something you're passionate about and make content about it, and the money will follow. And I think that advice is fine for some people, but it's also how you end up 2 years into a channel with a decent audience and almost no income, because you picked a niche where the money just isn't there. The thing I'd tell myself is to start with the question of where the money already is. Like, which niches have companies with budgets trying to reach audiences? And then find the intersection of that and something you're genuinely interested in, because that intersection is where you can build something that's both sustainable and profitable. And in my case, that intersection was AI and making money online, which happened to be something I found genuinely interesting and also happened to have one of the richest sponsor ecosystems on YouTube. And if I'd thought about it that way at 21, rather than starting with what interested me and working backwards to the money, I think I'd have landed in the same place, but faster, and with more confidence that it was the right place to be. The third thing I'd tell myself is that the timeline is longer than you want it to be, and shorter than you're afraid it might be. And what I mean by that is there are 2 failure modes around timeline expectations. The first is expecting it to happen fast and quitting when it doesn't. And the second is assuming it's going to take so long that it's not worth starting. And both of those are wrong in ways that cost people real opportunity. The honest timeline from starting a faceless educational channel in the right niche to making meaningful income is somewhere between 12 and 24 months, if you're consistent. And I know that sounds like a long time. And I know 21-year-old me would have found that discouraging. But the thing I'd want him to understand is that those 12 to 24 months are going to pass regardless. Like, that time is going to be spent on something. And the question is just whether at the end of it, you have a compounding asset that makes you 2 grand a month, or whether you spent the same period of time in a way that produced nothing that compounds. And 12 to 24 months is also way shorter than most people fear. Like most people, when they think about building something successful online, imagine it taking 5 or 10 years, or never. And the actual timeline in the right niche with consistent posting is much more manageable than that. And I wish I'd known that at 21, because I think the fear that it would take forever was one of the things that kept me in the thinking phase longer than I needed to be. The fourth thing I'd tell myself is to stop consuming so much content about building things and start building things. And I think this is probably the most uncomfortable one to say because it applies to videos like this one. Like, there's a version of watching videos about how to build a YouTube channel that is actually just procrastination dressed up as research. I spent a lot of time at 21 watching creators talk about their income and their process and their strategies, and some of that was genuinely useful, but a lot of it was just satisfying the feeling of doing something productive without actually being productive. And the distinction between learning and procrastinating is a lot thinner than it feels in the moment. The test I'd give myself now is pretty simple, which is whether the thing I'm consuming is going to change what I do tomorrow. And if the answer is no, then I should probably stop consuming it and start doing the thing I already know I should be doing. Because there is genuinely a point where you have enough information to start, and anything beyond that is just delay. The fifth thing is about consistency, and I want to see something specific about it, rather than just telling myself to be consistent. Because being told to be consistent is not very useful if you don't understand what makes consistency hard and how to deal with that. The thing that makes consistency hard is not laziness, at least not for me. It's the absence of external accountability. Like with a job, you have to show up because there are consequences if you don't. But with a channel, there are no consequences in the short term if you skip a week. And that absence of external pressure means the only thing keeping you consistent is internal motivation. And internal motivation is variable in a way that external accountability isn't. The thing I'd tell myself is to set up whatever structures you can that create some external accountability, like publicly committing to a posting schedule, telling people about the channel, joining a community of other creators. Whatever makes skipping feel like a cost rather than just a quiet default. Because the consistency is the single most important variable in whether the channel works, and anything that makes consistency more likely is worth doing. The sixth thing, and this is the last one, is about the compound effect and why it matters more than any individual piece of content or any individual decision. At 21, I understood compounding as a financial concept, but I didn't really understand it as something that applied to building an audience. Like, I didn't fully grasp that the subscriber I get today is a subscriber who might watch my next 50 videos, and that the back catalog I build this month is still going to be sending me affiliate income in 2 years, and that the trust I build with the audience through consistent, honest content is worth more than any single viral video, because it's the thing that makes every subsequent video land better than it would have otherwise. And understanding that would have changed how I thought about the early phase. Like, instead of being demoralized by the low view counts in the first few months, I'd have understood that I was building the foundation that the compounding would eventually work on, and that the slow phase was not evidence that it wasn't working. It was just the early part of a process that only becomes visible later. 2 years later, 25,000 subscribers, $2,000 a month, a school community compounding on top of it, and it all came from starting and not stopping. And I genuinely think if I'd started at 21 instead of 23, the channel would be significantly further along right now. And the 2 years I'd have gained would be compounding at a scale that's hard to fully picture. And that's the thing I'd most want 21-year-old me to understand. If you want help building something like this, I do have a school community linked in the description. There's one-to-one feedback available depending on which tier you join. No pressure, Cheers for watching.